Good evening. I'm Father Jeff Hahnemann, the priest in charge of St. John's Episcopal Church in Washington, Connecticut. And this is Storytime, a production of St. John's as part of our online outreach to parishioners and friends in this time of self-quarantine and pandemic, and made possible with the support of viewers like you. Tonight, the story of the Algerian Martyrs. This year marks the 25th anniversary of the Algerian Martyrs, but it's a story that few people in this country paid much attention to at the time. If you've been watching the carefully selected films that I put out each week on my What to Do Next email, you will have noticed that one of them is a depiction of the story of the Algerian Martyrs, called Of Gods and Men, which premiered at the 2010 Cannes Film Festival and won the grand prize at the time. I recommend the film to you all if you haven't seen it, because it is the story of assassins belonging to the armed Islamic group, the GIA, an extremist faction, locked in violent combat against the military-backed Algerian government at the time, who cut throats of the 7 Trappist priests and brothers who became the Algerian Martyrs. The trouble began in December 1991, when the unpopular government in Algeria suddenly canceled elections in which the fundamentalist Islamic party, the FIS, seemed to be winning. The FIS was promptly outlawed by the existing government, and then an even more radical group was formed in the mountains, the armed Islamic group, the GIA. And it was this group that warned all the foreigners to leave the country, and then began to indulge in periodic acts of terrorism against the foreigners in their country who did not leave. More than 70,000 people were killed in this 7-year civil war. The Trappist community of Notre-Dame-des-Landes gathered to discuss what they should do in the face of this new warning and the threat of expulsion. Trappists, the popular or more familiar name for the Order of Cistercians of the Strict Observance, ought to be the last people to be attacked by such terrorists. For Cistercians don't evangelize, and they aren't political. The order goes back in quiet faithfulness to the 6th century rule of St. Benedict, a model for simple and prayerful living. Thomas Merton, who died in 1968, is perhaps the most famous Trappist monk of our time. He wrote that his order's mission is love, the clean, unselfish love that does not live on what it gets, but on what it gives, a love that increases by pouring itself out for others, that grows by self-sacrifice and becomes mighty by throwing itself away. Although the community was fully committed to the traditional Cistercian contemplative life, along with many other Third World communities, it also extended monastic hospitality by providing medical care for those who came to the monastery door in need. The oldest victim among the monks was Brother Luc Dahier, 83, who was a physician well known in the desert towns as a healer to all who came to the gate of the monastery. And continuing the earliest Cistercian tradition, the brothers also worked the monastery farm and gardens and shared their expertise with their less fortunate neighbors, inducing and enhancing the lives of the poor around them. Father Christian de Charge was the superior of the monastery. He had first gone to Algeria in the French army, and after a conversion experience, he returned as a priest in 1969. For 2 years in the 1970s, he went to Rome to study the Quran and to learn Arabic, the better to immerse himself in the Islamic culture around the monastery. The monks were fully aware of the Civil War bloodshed, and they were at risk trying to live peaceably amidst it. Still, when it came to it, they voted not to leave. On Christmas Eve 1993, 6 gunmen of the armed Islamic group went to the Atlas Monastery. They asked the monks to collaborate with them in return for armed protection. Declining, Father Christian wrote to the group's leader, "Brother, allow me to address you like this, as man to man, believer to believer. In the present conflict in which our country is living, it seems to us impossible to take sides. Our state as monks binds us to the choice of God for us. We which is prayer and the simple life, manual work, hospitality, and sharing with everyone, especially the poor. Sensing at that time that he might one day be killed, Father Christian also wrote a letter to a friend to be opened should such ever happen. In that letter, he asked that his friends not confuse the beauties of Islam with the fundamentalist ideology of its extremists. To the person who might soon cut his throat, he wrote, I commend you to God, in whose face I see yours, and may we find each other happy, good thieves in paradise, if it please God, the Father of us both. He also wrote that, quote, if it should happen one day that I become a victim of the terrorism which now seems to encompass all the foreigners living in Algeria, I would like my community, my church, my family, to remember that my life was given to God and to this country, to accept that the one master of all life was not a stranger to this brutal departure, to pray for me, for how should I be found worthy of such an offering? To be able to associate this death with so many other equally violent ones that have been allowed to fall into the indifference of anonymity. In March of 1996, the armed Islamic group, seeking the release of several of their members held in French jails on bombing charges, went to the monastery of Notre Dame des Lattes and abducted 7 of the 9 monks working there and praying there. The President of France would later refuse to negotiate with the terrorists, who warned, the choice is yours. If you liberate, we shall liberate. If you refuse, we will cut their throats. Praise be to God. On May 21st of that year, the threat was carried out. The bodies were found a week later near Mahdia, 45 miles southwest of Algiers. In the end, the Martyrs of Algeria refer to 19 individuals slain during the course of the Algerian Civil War from 1994 until the death of the new bishop of Oran, Pierre Clavillet, in 1996. The death of the Trappist monks from the Atlas Monastery remains controversial, since there are some reports that the armed forces tried a rescue attempt, and that was what prompted the armed Islamic group to carry out the killings. Nonetheless, these murders of religious people are a shocking reminder to us that the age of martyrs is hardly confined, as we so often think, to the pages of the early church. In recent years, Christians everywhere have found themselves victims of religious persecution. In Angola, in Uganda, in Bosnia, in the southern Sudan, in India, in Nigeria, in Zaire, in Egypt, in Afghanistan, on the island of Cyprus, or Sri Lanka. Persecuted, hunted down, tortured, murdered, because they were Christians. Let us remember the martyrs of Algeria and all those who die for the sake of their faith. Let us pray. O God, you have so bound us together in a common life. Help us in the midst of our struggles for justice and truth and peace to confront one another without hatred or bitterness or prejudice, and to work together with mutual forbearance and mutual respect. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. I hope you've enjoyed this story time. Every Wednesday night at 8 o'clock on the St. John's Facebook page will appear another one. They're shortly thereafter put onto the St. John's YouTube page, where if you've missed any of them, you can easily find the others and go back. In the meantime, good night and God bless.